I went out to dinner in Portsmouth, New Hampshire Saturday night. In my post Molly life and post everything, and now having a young child, I don't go out much. I don't have a big social circle. And there was a part of me that just did not want to get in the car and drive to Portsmouth. But I was having dinner with Lisa, Leslie, and Marty, three of my BU teammates and running compatriots from the late 70s and the early 80s. As is always the case when you get a group of old ladies together, we retell the same stories and laugh as if we've never heard them before. We have new stories to add to the old stories. We have new lists of physical issues that we're dealing with and an increasing level of disdain for current culture and societal norms and all that sort of thing. This is when I feel like we spend so much time fighting the natural process of life. And if we would just sit back and enjoy the ride and realize this is where we are now. So we're all in our 60s. All of us were born in 1963. Marty in January, Leslie and Lisa in March, and me in July. So I'm the baby of the group, right? I had the best time laughing, crying, clutching my heart, talking about everything. But what came to mind for me, and I've talked about this a lot in many podcast episodes, is the amount of dysfunction and abuse that occurred, not just within elite running and distance running, but within the lives of many of us who became elite athletes. One of my big connections now in my life and all that I've gone through is my connection to my body with my mind, that I grew up hating my body because I was being abused. And so I found myself disgusting. And I lived a life of body hating long after I loved what my body could do on a track and now in a CrossFit gym. It's a lifetime of rewriting and re-narrating the tapes in your head to change how you feel about yourself. And of the four of us, three of us have horrific childhood stories, some far more horrific than others. All of us, though, even those of us that have sort of a moderate childhood, took a lot of our trauma in with us to our distance running and utilized it to prove to ourselves that we were amazing and to prove to others that we were amazing. There's a book called The Silence of Great Distance, and it was written by a guy named Frank Murphy, who wrote another book called On a Cold, Clear Day. I don't know off the top of my head his connection to running, but both of these books are phenomenal. And The Silence of Great Distance focused on the emergence of elite distance running, female distance running in the late 70s and early 80s. Without insulting any of my trans friends in the trans community, I am talking about female-bodied humans. Male-bodied humans, regardless of how they may have identified in the late 70s and the 80s, had access to all the things that female-bodied humans didn't. In trying to be respectful with current narrative around gender and sex and what's what and what's more important and what matters more than another and how do they intersect or don't they, for the purpose of this podcast, I am talking about female-bodied humans, little girls that were little girls before Title IX, little girls growing up in a very male-dominated world. I went off to BU in 1981. I started running in 1979. I got good really fast. And this is always sort of awe-inspiring over and over again to this group of three. So Leslie, Lisa, and Marty were already significantly established as elite runners by the end of their sophomore years in high school. I never met Marty that spring, because she had been injured, but they were already very well established. So when we were talking about the New Englands in 1979 at dinner, Lisa and Leslie were sharing these stories of their races and their second place finishes. And all of a sudden it dawned on me that I was in that mile race. The conversation sort of went around like, didn't you just start running? I said, yeah, I'd only been running for 2 months, or, a little over 2 months when I placed sixth in the New Englands, which when I look back on it now is a huge, huge accomplishment. In the theme of season 13, and really looking back on my running career as a whole, my major accomplishment with running was utilizing it to find who I was, to allow myself to love my body and to realize that I was good at something. I had never been the best at anything. I was smart, but not the smartest. I could sing, but I never got the solos. I was a good violinist, but I wasn't first chair. Like, I was good at everything I did, but I was never like a star. And then when my asthma became really bad, it made things even worse. So I went to sports that didn't require you to get out of breath, and I was terrible at them. Gymnastics. I was a good dancer, but not a great dancer. Again, the same thing. And then I started running, and I remember so vividly after I had broken 5 minutes in the mile and done all these great things, going out for a walk one summer night and thinking, wow, I'm the best. Like, I'm the best at this. It was huge for me. And I carried that with me for the next 20 years of my life. 25 years, where I went to college, then I coached. I just immersed myself in running and could not imagine a life without running in it until I didn't have running in it. So, in looking back over all that happens to females in elite sports, I'm going to focus on three things. The first is sexual abuse within elite athletes. So, not just sexual abuse by coaches, that's very prevalent, but those young girls that grow up and find sports as an escape for what's happening to them at home, whether it's just physical abuse or sexual abuse or whatever, and how distance running in particular, but endurance sports in general, can be very, very healing. For me, it's this constant battle of overcoming pain and battling it and overcoming, your body beating the pain. It's so prevalent over sustaining abuse where you have to go to a place where you can manage it. I remember going off to college and driving to our cross-country camp, and there were 7 freshmen, 7 of us, and there were a handful of girls that had already been there. And in the years to come, there were more that showed up. And of the 7 of us, there were 4 out of the 7 that had inappropriate connections with their high school coaches. So, do you have 4 wacko girls that seduce older men? Or do you have a prevalence of men who think it's okay to seduce younger women? So let's look back. Now I'm talking the 70s. We were all in high school in the late 70s, graduating in 81. And lots of things were considered okay back then. We had this conversation at dinner the other night that society just dictated that these things were acceptable. A major one was weight, making girls stay skinny, mandatory weigh-ins. All of these things were done. And girls, being girls raised in the 70s, acquiesced. We were told to be quiet. We were told to be obedient. Good girls were quiet and they behaved and they acted appropriately. Little boys were excused again and again for poor behavior. Well, they're little boys. We expect that. We don't expect it from girls. So we had this whole conversation and we talked about the fact that so many of us had inappropriate relationships with coaches. We all know that's the only reason I started running was my inappropriate relationship with who was then my biology teacher. Of this group of us, 2 more had relationships with coaches in their adult life, even falling in love and marrying. Looking at some runners that were at BU before us and some that came after, this is a pattern that was prevalent. There are many famous running couples where the husband coaches the wife. I don't know that that's necessarily unhealthy, but you don't often see the wife coaching the husband, if you know what I mean. There's a power struggle with a coach and an athlete that can be murky at times. After my job loss, and I talk a lot about all the things I didn't do to fight for myself after my job loss. The biggest loss for me, aside from the job, was the coaching and the running. Due to the things that were said about me by Chris Rath and Gene Connolly, and not said necessarily publicly, but very much to anyone that would talk. I remember hearing things about teachers from Gene Connolly that were none of my business, and he had no trouble sharing them because these were teachers he didn't like. And I think it gave him some perverse pleasure to say these things. I remember once there was a teacher that he had forced to resign, and she considered herself really smart, and he had no trouble telling me that she had a C average in college and how fun it was for him and Chris Rath to just put her report card down and sort of belittle her for her poor grades in college. And I just remember thinking at that time, God, I hope I never get in his bad side, which of course I did. Gene had no trouble, and Chris didn't say it. Gene was her flying monkey. She got him to say all these things. He would tell people that I stole money from the Booster Club. He would tell people I wasn't the same as I was before Roy, and that it was my desire to have an affair that made me unsuitable to be around kids. None of these things were even remotely true. I remember for the first time, running didn't make me feel better. From age 15 to age 45, 20 years, 30 years, running made me feel better. I loved running. I loved how I felt when I ran. I loved my running community. And in an instant, through the words of, liars, Gene Connolly, Amy Frizzell, Chris Rath, and a host of others that bought into this, I was completely isolated from my running community. And it was decimating. The whole being told I had stolen from the Booster Club, which I never had, made Bob Teschik, who I co-directed the Bill Ludi race, not trust me. And, he was listening to Amy, who worked for him because, I got her a job with him. I had a couple of neighbors that also worked for the running club that didn't like me and wouldn't speak to me. And I remember thinking, I get these people jobs, I help them, and that they turn around and say these terrible things about me. It's that whole process of me glomming on to people that will hurt me and ignoring the people that like me, right? This whole dinner date the other night and just this recollections of time gone by and looking back when running was simple and it wasn't about interviewing people on podcasts and fancy running shoes that would make you run faster and fancy running outfits and all that stuff is fun. I get it. You create community and one thing I do like is the nonprofits and how people run marathons to raise money for people. There's a lot of wonderful things, but all of us remembered when running was just putting on a pair of beat up Nike Cortez and heading out the door. You didn't have some electric watch that measured every single thing you did. You didn't have to put earbuds in your ears to listen to your perfect playlist to make sure you were in a good mood while you ran. You just ran. I can remember looking at the clock over the kitchen sink and seeing what time it was and looking at it when I got back. And all right, I ran for an hour. And that was how I timed myself. It wasn't all this technical stuff. This always makes me retrospective and it makes me wonder why I didn't fight for myself. When I look back on my job loss and the fact that the ways I sat still, that one of the biggest memories for me was sitting in a meeting with Gene Connolly and Steve Mello, the AD. And they had both intricately manipulated me all fall to make them think they were supporters of me. But we had this meeting where I basically quit coaching and I have no idea to this day why I did it. But I sat down and they were like, we want you to take the season off. What do you think? Just don't coach for one season. We don't want you to come back too fast. We're worried about you and all this. And then Gene Connolly says to me, well, Chris Rath says you're having an affair with that man. It stunned me into silence. And I think Chris knew that it would because she has that manipulative, horrifying sociopathic tendency to know how to hurt people and how to silence people. And she knew that I didn't stand up for myself well. She had seen me in several meetings already. And I just stood there. And so I grinned, which is what I do when I'm anxious. I smile. I used to get in trouble as a little kid. Why are you smiling? You're in trouble. It's what I did when I was uncomfortable. And I put my head down on the table and I just didn't, okay, well, whatever you think is best. I don't want to stop coaching, but if you think I should, I will. And I walked away. I remember walking out of that office and like, wow, I'm not coaching. And then later, when I got all the paperwork back, my contract and written in big words and big letters in Gene's handwriting, resigned. I did not resign. I agreed to take a season off. Those kinds of secrets I kept. Chris Rath holding up a check saying I cashed it and stole it. And when I turned it around and looked on the back, it said deposited. There was a deposit stamp on it and her shaking her head. These are things I could have publicly shared to the newspaper that I didn't. I just stayed silent. And that silence has hurt me for years and years. I'm much less silent about it now, as is obvious. So when I think of running in the mind, body, spirit of fitness, and where am I now? Now that I'm 62, almost 63, when running is painful, when it makes me sad still, when I want to run more, when I want to start a road race to raise money for Molly's foundation. Would Molly have been a good runner? All of the things that come around with running. I look back at the fact that I coached for 20 years at Concord High School, 5 years at Bow, a year in Woburn, a year at Simmons College, a year at Newton North High School. That's 28 years of coaching. I had 20 years of highly competitive running. And then I had 24 years of highly competitive running. And then 32 years of active daily running before it all sort of blew up in my face. And I just couldn't do it anymore. Going back to coaching at Bow was a huge risk for me, one that didn't pan out once Mike Desilets was hired. But it did remind me that I'm good at that I'm good at what I do. In sitting in the present in 2026 with no real forced future path for me, I can really choose what I want. I know that I want running somehow to be a bigger part of it. I think it's why I'm so invested in the High Rocks movement, because you run 5 miles in a High Rocks race, and that just appeals to me. I know that I miss that group. I miss it. I miss the connection of running. I miss the people I knew. I miss being an important part of that community. I look at people now that are big in the running community, or, like road race announcers and race directors and, people in the media. I look at the people that they admire. And this was my social group at one time. I'm one of those old people that remembers all the good old people of running. I look on social media and I go back and look people up. I look up my former runners. I look up former people I worked with and trained with. When I worked at New England Runner for all those years, when I worked at the USA Track and Field Office, New England, so invested in running. And then just in 2011, it stopped. So where am I going with this and all my rambling? My biggest piece here is that I really miss running and I really love running. And I let the lies of, let's be honest here, I let the lies of Gene Connolly and Chris Rath remain protected to protect them. And actually to protect, when I look at it too, there was a whole social group. Jean's daughter, Allie, ran for me. I spent hours with that girl away from my own kids. I helped her in college and after college. She ran kids camp at Barb's track camp for several summers. She was a huge, important piece of my life. And for a long time, I was an important piece of hers. And now, of course, I'm public enemy number one. Why? Because I shared a truth. And I didn't share it in the kindest way, but I didn't make anything up. I stopped protecting her. So, what's more important, me keeping secrets and bearing the brunt of horrible truths about me to maintain a false belief on her end? Maybe. There are people who would call me selfish. I'm just tired of people looking at me and thinking things are true about me that aren't. And I'll say again, you can ask me anything. I'm not going to lie about the answer. From that difficulty, the Gene Connolly piece and me keeping his secrets was all of the friends of Allie's, all of the runners, all of the track and cross country athletes that I coached over the years. I look at lots and lots of connections over the years that have maintained strong in other coaching and not with me. And I know that it's because of my job loss and all of the horrifying things that were said about me. When I look at Bo and trying to protect the Lucy family and trying to protect myself, I guess, by being quiet. Had I just shared the nasty letter and the stories and been open about it and talked about it publicly, I may not have kept my job at Bo, which quite frankly, I don't miss. I miss the kids. I would have not suffered like I did. And it's hard for me as I wrap up retracing my steps to see why Molly died and deciding where to go from here, how to close the door on things and how to reconcile things. So here's where I'm at with running. Number one, my 2026 goals have been to increase the amount of running that I do, and I have done that. Not to the extent I was hoping, but definitely have increased the amount of running that I do, and that makes me happy. Part of it is a necessity. With my whole High Rocks adventures coming up, I have to run regularly because that's part of the race. So there's that. Number two, I want to reconnect with a lot of the athletes that I've coached. When you think of 20 years of coaching, 1, 2, 3 seasons a year, that's thousands of young women who are now in their 30s, 40s, and 50s, right? Maybe even late 20s. Yeah, some of the Bo athletes. I would love to reconnect with them and have a bigger following and have meaningful discourse with them. I would love to reconnect with all of my Boston connections, my Nike connections, my Liberty Athletic Club connections, my, BU connections. My teammates and I, we have a wonderful group and we get together and we've traveled together a couple of times and we talk on Zoom sometimes. We've done all sorts of different things. But I do know that it was such a huge piece of my life. And the only reason that I'm as good as I am at CrossFit, that I'm as good as I am at High Rocks, because I'm a really good runner. And I miss the Barb that was a really good runner. I just do. I do. So secrets in running for me. Well, obviously starting running because I was in love with my coach, maintaining that relationship all through high school. My next secret relationship for a long time was Jay, who owned a running store, much older than me. He was a runner and a huge piece of my running reality in high school, my freshman year of college. So I'm at BU now, earned Division I All-American. I do great things, but I'm a disastrous health, mental health. I joined Nike Boston. I start dating the coach of Nike Boston. So my patterns are continuing, right? And then I move home because I need to move home. It's the right thing to do. And I get sober for a long period of time and do a lot of work. And I continue running. And I run road races and I time road races. And I really build and I start coaching. And it doesn't take me long to build up big, successful, wonderful cross country and track teams. My biggest teams in Concord were 60 on girls cross country, 45 at Bow. And that's a school that's less than half the size of Concord High. So that's probably my biggest team, actually, when you think of per capita students. But 60 girls, one of my last years of coaching at Concord High, 30 of them seniors. All those years of coaching and building big teams and spending hours of my life away from my family. But those girls are my family. And then it goes away. And then it comes back for a bit. All my Nike Boston years and my Granite State Racing Team years and timing for Granite State Race Services, all of those things, thinking that really my whole trajectory was running. And of course, Coach Ludi. I think sometimes the purchase of his house is to stay connected to a part of my life that was so good and so healthy. Coach Ludi never left, not once. He stayed with me. He stayed with me all through it. No matter what mistakes I made or what was written about me in a newspaper, he knew the truth. And he would likely say, less is best. Stop telling all your secrets. If the tide is shut up, shut up. He would be of the nature that, as long as you know what's true, that's all that matters. And there are times that that's true. But if I or my family or my loved ones or Molly's foundation start to suffer because of lies being said about me, I'm done with that. And that's not right. There's a very prolific public figure connected to running in my area that lives in the same town as Allie and is good friends with my stepdaughter. I'm quite sure she's heard terrible things about me. Her reticence and body language is easy for me to read, being an old lady now and being able to step back and look at the reality of it. I look back on all of the key aspects of me as a sexually abused little girl, as an adult human female who was in a male-dominated love, which was athletics. It really hasn't been equitable. It still isn't equitable now. Female-bodied athletes lose it from both sides. It's incredibly unfair what we have to go through, those of us born female. I look at how my role as that part of the community has affected me and allowed me to really get walked all over. It's interesting because at dinner the other night, I am the one person in that group that was probably least likely to stand up for myself growing up. I was too afraid. I didn't want to hurt people's feelings. I was too afraid to do anything. I didn't want to upset the apple cart, so to speak. And I just listened to their stories and I'm in awe because I was never that brave. I was just always making sure that I was doing what I thought I was supposed to do. Running was a huge part of my life. And when I think back to the months around my job loss and then how I was treated afterwards, I had to bring letters from Chris Rath to assure that I could still officiate at track meets and I wasn't a danger to society because I'd lost my job. It was humiliating and it was all predicated on lies and mistruths and the manipulation of truth by somebody I really trusted. And that was Gene Connolly and a host of people at Concord High School that were happy to lie about me on his behalf. And that's hard to deal with because it's not fair or right or correct. So where am I going now? Well, I am going to, the year I had Molly, my cross-country team gave me a gift of a road race, the Flower Day 5K. And so I'm going to reestablish the Flower Day 5K. And I'm going to really reach out to anyone that has ever run for me, everywhere, not just Concord High, Bow, Newton North High School, Simmons College, Woburn. If you ever ran for me or ran with me, Nike Boston, Liberty, Granite State Racing Team, wherever, if you ever ran with me, I want to try to develop that kind of community. I also am dying to see if people in my running community are getting into high rocks. Will you see me winning road races? I don't know. It would be fun. In wrapping up running saved me. It saved my life. And it gave me a free education and it gave me travel to almost all 50 states and Canada. It gave me a name. It gave me a platform. It gave me a community. It gave me a place where I mattered and felt important. And then it was gone. And of course, that's where CrossFit came in and I refound myself there. But I miss running. I miss the running community. I miss mattering in that reality. Maybe a little bit of that is ego, but I think mostly it's that sense of belonging and homesickness. My running hireth. What I want back might never exist again. So if you're a runner or you ran for me, reach out and let me know how you're doing and how running has helped you. And did you get into it because you were in love with your track coach? If you're my age, that's a distinct possibility. I apologize if this episode was fumbly and rambly. It's a lot of emotion for me. In the wrapping up of this podcast being all about me and my life, I'm trying to figure out where to go next. I just appreciate the support. And if there's one story that you haven't heard or you think there's some big secret I should share, I am into the secret sharing. So reach out and let me know. Be good to yourself. Go for a little run. Don't even have to go fast. Be good to someone else. Invite them to go with you. And as always, have a good day, everybody. Hey, thanks for listening and supporting the podcast. Feel free to leave a review and share my stories with your friends. Please reach out with your own stories as I love connecting with my listeners. If you would like to get to know Molly, head over to mollybfoundation.org to see what she is all about. If you want to see what I'm up to next, you can find me on Instagram at Barb_444, on Facebook as Barb Higgins, and at my website, 1000tinysteps.com. And while you're there, sign up for my newsletter, a weekly way to find out what's up in the life of Barb Higgins.